Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Florestil, and I'm a third-year student at the University of Central Florida here in Orlando, Florida. And tonight, I have the awesome opportunity to interview Roger Osbaldiston, who is the VP of Global Student Movements. Before we get started with our interview here, Roger, I'd like to know if you could summarize in one sentence what you do.
Sure, Sarah. Well, I have the privilege of being able to give leadership to the global student movements of Cru around the world. And our desire is to help get the good news of Jesus to every student on the planet. So we want to build spiritual movements on every campus in the world that are getting the gospel to every student, and then part of raising up leaders who can then go and influence the world for Christ. So it's a pretty fun job.
It sounds fantastic. Before we get started with our interview, I'd like to make mention of the fact that we are having a t-shirt giveaway for the first 5 people to ask a question at the end of this interview. So this is what the t-shirt looks like. So once again, for the first 5 people who ask questions, that t-shirt can be yours. So just so you guys know, for our viewers who are watching right now, tonight is all about how we can get the good news of the gospel to every person. So that just leads me to my first question for you, Roger. How is it possible that we could reach every person in the world?
Yeah, it's a big task, isn't it?
Quite.
I think the starting point for me is just knowing that this is God's idea, that it's His plan, that it's His... Jesus gave us the command to go and make disciples of all nations.
Right.
And He promised to be with us as we go and do that. So knowing that it's His job and it's His idea, and He's the one who's in charge of the mission, gives me a lot of encouragement and hope. But that He invites us to be a part of that.
Right.
And so Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. And He invites us to kind of get involved and be a part of that. And as a movement and Cru, we take that seriously.
Right.
And in 1951, when Bill and Vonette Bright began the movement, and they received that vision from God to go and reach the world, they believed that reaching university and college students was the fastest and most strategic way to spread the gospel around the world. And so we get the chance to continue that.
Right.
So our desire is to share the gospel with every student, build a movement on every campus, and be a part of raising up leaders in every nation. And I think, too, another thing that gives me great just excitement is to know that God has promised that He will reach the world.
Right.
That if we go to Acts 1:8 in the New Testament, where Jesus says, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth.
Right.
You know, I come from New Zealand originally, and which is literally, compared to Jerusalem, is sort of on the ends of the earth. And so the good news of Jesus has spread, around the world. And Jesus said in the book of Matthew, He said, and this gospel will be preached on all the earth, and then the end will come.
Right.
And so we have this confidence that He is with us, it's His plan, it's His idea, and He invites us, to be a part of that. Another thing is He also gives us a strategy for how to do that. And we've come to term that as spiritual multiplication. And, Jesus, when He began His ministry, He knew that He wouldn't be around, 3 years afterwards. And so He began with that end in mind. And He preached and taught and went through different villages. But during His ministry, He appointed 12 leaders. And when He died and went to be with the Father, He then empowered those leaders to go and multiply. And they began to take the gospel to all different parts of the world. And we know the stories of the Apostle Paul, who took the gospel throughout a lot of the known world. And one of his leaders was Timothy, who was a pastor in Ephesus. And he says to him, the things I've told you, Timothy, entrust to faithful people who'll be qualified to teach others also. And so there's that process of generational multiplication. And so if we think about the chance of helping everyone to hear, God's strategy is that of spiritual multiplication, that people would pass it on from one person to the next.
Oh, fantastic. I love how you mentioned that the vision in general of preaching the gospel was instituted by the Lord, and so He's the one that allows us to take part in that. So that's awesome. So what do you think, with all of this in mind, what do you think are the changes that need to take place in order for us to do this, to take part of this vision?
Well, obviously the population of the world is growing at a pretty rapid rate. I think we're well over 7 billion, and there's probably 5 billion people who don't identify themselves as followers of Jesus. So there's a massive job and task to be done. And we know that God is with us and He's empowering us to do that. But He has commissioned us to be involved in that.
Right.
And we kind of each have our part to play. I think sometimes we can think about two different concepts, one of spiritual addition or multiplication. And spiritual addition is where we get to share the message with people and pass it on to others. And multiplication is when we begin to train and equip others to then take that on and do that.
Right.
And sometimes I think we can fall into the addition only, which is fine, but it's not going to help us get to the whole scope of what is in the world. I love this story that I heard of a man who was walking along the beach one day. And he observed along the beach that there were thousands of starfish over miles and miles of beach that had been washed up. And they were in the sun and they were dying.
Right.
And so he has compassion on the starfish and starts to throw them back, one by one into the ocean. And another man comes along and sees him doing this and sees the miles and miles of the thousands and thousands of starfish. And he says to him, how do you hope to make a difference when there's so many and you are doing them one by one?
Right.
And the man looks up and he throws one more starfish out and he says, well, it makes a difference to this one. And he throws it back. Well, that kind of can be an emotionally touching story that we get to impact the life of a starfish, one starfish. But I also think it's kind of a sad story because I believe we need to be concerned about all the starfish.
Right.
And Jesus is compassionate for everyone. And He wants everyone to have the opportunity to come to know Him. And I kind of imagine, what if that man had not just started throwing the starfish back one by one, but instead he'd gone back to his town or village and grabbed 5 friends and said to them, hey, would you come and help me rescue these starfish on the beach? In fact, why don't you 5 go and find 5 more friends and multiply the number of people?
Right.
And they could have all gone down to the beach, they could have thrown all of the starfish back into the water, they could have sat down on the beach, had a drink and watched the sunset, knowing that the job had kind of been accomplished.
Right.
So I think that's the challenge for me, is to think it's great to be involved, personally in how do we help reach maybe one person in one campus in one place, but what does it mean to actually multiply that impact and invite and challenge others to be a part of it? So a big part, I think, of our challenge is mobilizing and multiplying those who are involved in the work.
Right.
One of the verses in Scripture that challenged me as I thought about getting involved with Crew, as a full-time staff member, was Ephesians 4:12. And it says there that God gave different gifts to the church. Some He gave gift of evangelism, people to be prophets, pastors, teachers. And then it says, so that they may equip the believers for works of service.
Right.
Sometimes I think I fall into the trap that God gave the gifts like of evangelism so that those people would do all the evangelism.
Right.
But that's not what it says. It says he gave the gift of evangelism that the evangelists might equip and train others for that work of service. So multiplying that impact. And so I think it's vital that there are organizations like Crew and others around and people who dedicate their time full-time as staff members and mission workers to be involved in that full-time of equipping and coming alongside people. But the essential task of actually reaching everyone, everyone can be involved with if we help come alongside and mobilize, train, equip people.
Right. Definitely. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you for that. So then, with this idea of students leading movements, in this day and age, I guess you could say, with all of the distractions, can students really lead movements, and how can they go about that?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges I think we face, particularly bringing it to the student ministry arena, is there are about 30,000 major universities around the world. There's thousands more smaller institutions, and the number of students is growing at a pretty rapid rate as more and more people have access to tertiary education. So the task and the mission keeps getting bigger, but the rate at which we are actually reaching different campuses and students is not necessarily increasing. So we need to think about ways that we can do things differently. One of our approaches over the years has been to have a team of workers on, let's say, one campus. Well, if there's 30,000 campuses in the world, we're just simply not going to be able to do that.
Right.
And one student in the Netherlands shared this at a conference last year with us. She said, we can't have staff and leaders on every campus, but there are already students on every campus. So it's kind of logical, really. If there's a campus, there's going to be students. Right. And we believe that God is at work and that he's preparing the hearts of students to lead movements and ministries on those campuses. That it's not just when people are sent and show up in a place that God starts to work. He's already at work. He's working in people's hearts and preparing things. But also with the internet today, radio, TV, over the years, different technologies, the message of Jesus has gone out. You think about the Jesus film just being translated into its 1500th language this week.
Wow.
The message is going out in so many different ways, and so it's not a surprise to us that when we go to a campus and look for potential student leaders, that there are people there that have come to faith, even if it's a place where there's not much witness happening. And so we're developing a strategy of helping students to lead campuses where we can't always send staff to. And I really believe, students can lead.
Yeah.
In fact, I think actually if we go back to Jesus and choosing those 12 leaders that he commissioned, if we look at the New Testament, those leaders were most likely mostly teenagers. They were young people that Jesus challenged, trained, and then he left, equipped to carry on the ministry. And so that's kind of how the church began, was through young people taking leadership.
Right.
And through history, he's continued to do that. If we skip forward to, say, the 1700s, and at Oxford University, there was a group called the Oxford Holy Club. And there are names of people that you may know of, like Charles and John Wesley, who preached and wrote hymns and songs.
Right.
George Whitefield,
definitely
great preacher. They were together as part of a group at Oxford University as students who got a vision for what they could do in the world and then expanded from there.
Right.
In the 1800s, at Cambridge University, there was a group called the Cambridge Seven. And they were 7 students who had a passion to reach the world. And one was a cricketer, famous cricket player. Do you know cricket?
Yeah, I've seen cricket.
It's kind of an English thing. We play it in New Zealand. Go and serve in China and take the gospel to China.
Wow.
So in the 1700s, 1800s, and then in the 19th and 20th century, there was something called the student volunteer movement. And through that student volunteer movement, thousands of students volunteered to go and serve the Lord in mission fields around the world. So God using students is not a new thing. He's used young people and led young people. And then most recently, groups like InterVarsity, IFES, Navigators, Crew have begun and kind of continued that tradition on, in a sense, of coming alongside students and equipping them and helping them to lead.
Right.
But Sarah, you're a student. You're at University of Central Florida here in Orlando. What's your vision? You're a student leader.
Yes. Like I mentioned before, I'm a third-year student at the University of Central Florida, and I actually got involved with Crew my freshman year, and I had the opportunity to lead a community group, which a community group is a small Bible study with just a couple girls that met weekly. And so I guess I could say being involved with different, like that movement, and being involved with the college ministry at my church, like I've caught the need for the gospel to be preached. And so for personally, my vision is kind of like the underlying theme that I've been consistently learning from like people who are equipping me, that the vision is to reach people so that every person at some point in at least the Orlando area would know someone who has a relationship with the Lord. And so by that, my vision is that they see, whether verbally or just the way that I live, the gospel being preached. And so someday coming to the saving grace or the saving knowledge of salvation and coming to know the Lord Jesus Christ, then going off and doing that for someone else. So like it doesn't just stop at experiencing, oh, well, one person knows Jesus. Well, now I know him for myself, so I want to go teach someone else. So I guess that's kind of my vision at this point. And for the rest of my life, that people would see me and desire the Lord.
Yeah.
So,
That's fantastic. I mean,
definitely.
and I believe that there are students with a similar passion on so many of the campuses around the world that have similar gifts and passions and skills and want to reach their friends and equip and call others to be a part of that. And I think, we as Crew, as a movement, it's just a great opportunity for us to come alongside students like you, equip, train, and then encourage you to lead and trust God for the vision that he's put, on your heart. one of the things we're doing is something called exploring. And so we've got a goal by about 2020 to explore 15,000 new campuses around the world.
Wow.
So part of that is going onto a campus and exploring and just asking God, are there people here that God has been at work in who have a similar vision and passion? And we'll just do that same thing and ask, Sarah, hey, you're a student on this campus. What's your vision for this campus?
Yeah.
And then share a little bit of God's strategy of spiritual multiplication, the Great Commission, how we can be His witnesses and how we can multiply that impact through others. And then ask them if they have friends that can come alongside them.
Right.
And then they form a movement team, like a leadership team of students on that campus. And then as crew, we coach them, give them encouragement, sometimes like weekly coaching or monthly coaching, encouraging them how to do that and providing them with tools and resources and things. One of the coolest things I heard over the last little while was I met 3 guys who were in Belgium. And they were on a campus in Leuven, Belgium. And they wanted to see outreach happening on their campus, not just in their campus, actually in their city. And they observed that there maybe wasn't a lot happening, and they wanted to see how they could be a part of what God might do in their city. And at that time, they saw an ad on Facebook for our movement in a neighboring country, the Netherlands, and they responded to that, and they asked, hey, could you help us begin something here? And so they began to be coached from the Netherlands. The team went to visit them, and then they would phone them and help these guys they formed a small group, they formed a leadership team, and soon it grew to 30 or 40 students coming to be involved in fellowship.
Wow.
And then they would go out on the streets and they would use outreach tools. We have used something called perspective cards.
Yes,
and they would use that
Yeah.
in the streets. And this was a couple of years ago, and they're now on to, I think, their 3rd generation of student leaders. So we haven't had any staff, full-time ministry workers go to that campus. But there's now about a 3rd generation of student leaders who are continuing to lead that movement. And one of the leaders told me that actually in a neighboring city, they invited them to go to that city and help them. And so it's kind of that organic kind of spread of the movement is very much what you saw in the book of Acts in the early church.
Right.
As people kind of went everywhere and spread the message. And so we just want to be kind of catalysts to help that move along. A catalyst is some sort of chemical process where it speeds things up.
Right.
And so we as a movement kind of want to be catalysts to help people with the vision that God's put on their heart to expand that and multiply that.
Right, definitely. And so finally, if a person isn't a part of a movement as big as Crew or a movement, let's say they're an alumni from a school that they were a part of, where there's a movement active there, let's say they're just like an everyday person, how do you think they can take part in helping fulfill this, not being a part of a movement?
Well, one of the things I love about our movement and Dr. Bright, when he began the movement, was his desire and belief that anyone can be involved in the Great Commission.
Right.
That's the challenge given to all of us. And then he sought to find ways of how to help people do that. And he would often say he was in tears when he would discover that many people want to know Jesus, they just don't know how. And many people want to share Jesus, they just don't know how. And so he wrote the booklet, like the 4 Spiritual Laws booklet, which has been translated, and there are different versions of it out. But it's a simple 4-point outline of how someone can know Christ.
Right.
It's available in lots of different languages. It's available in digital tools, downloadable. So that's kind of a great starting point. And we have a very simple 3 words that often talk about in terms of beginning to minister personally, and they're the words prayer, care, and share. So begin to pray for people that are around you, to care for them and genuinely show interest in their lives, and thirdly, then to take the initiative to share with them and share something like the 4 Spiritual Laws. Doesn't have to be complicated.
Right.
Doesn't have to be really sophisticated. But I want to suggest a challenge, actually, and I call it the 5x5 challenge, and it's something that we've used on different campuses. Is encourage people to think about 5 people, friends that don't know Jesus,
Right.
who they could begin to share with and begin to pray for them and show care for them and take the opportunity to share with them. So 5 people who don't know Jesus, and then to make another list of 5 people who are friends who do know Jesus that they could challenge to do the same thing.
Right.
So kind of multiplying that impact. So we talked about, not just the one-to-one ministry, the one starfish, but how do we actually mobilize people to come and join?
Right.
And that forming a team of people who can come alongside each other and encourage each other and receive equipping and coaching together, that then can be multiplied out towards a movement. So that's what we seek to do on campus, around the world, but it's something that we can do, all of us, anywhere, is to think of 5 people that we can share our faith with and 5 people that we can challenge to be involved in the Great Commission as well. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. So we actually had a couple questions come in during this time. And so Kevin Zimmerman asks, how do you decide between going overseas to unreached people groups even and going to your own country that needs Jesus as well?
That's great.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Well, 2 thoughts, really. And I think there is always going to be places, well, there is so many places now where the message has not gone to. And I think thinking about what your skills and gifts and passions are, what's God putting on your heart? Is He putting on you a desire to go overseas and engage in another culture? Has He given you a gift for language, if it means learning another language?
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that in today's world, there is so much mobility and crossing over, and particularly in the student world, there are people coming from other countries to study in lots of different places.
Yeah.
And so you go to the university campuses in most parts of the world, there's a number of international students. And so sometimes we don't have to go overseas to reach people in our own country who are from over other countries.
Right.
And in many places, actually, where it can be really difficult and challenging to actually be living in another country, and it's not the same freedom to share the gospel in those countries, often people from those countries are moving to countries like the United States or New Zealand or places where they can have the chance to hear the gospel in a free and open environment, receive that equipping and encouragement, and then they often go back to their countries to work, and they can take that back with them. So I would probably go back to that question, that I asked you, what's your vision, what's God putting on your heart, and what has He equipped you for? That's probably where I'd start.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that helped, Kevin. Our next question from another viewer, from Marshall Jones, asks, do you think it would be more strategic and or biblical to focus our resources and laborers on a few or even one area at a time, thinking about critical mass, ability to multiply, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a key part of what we think about doing. I met these 2 young guys in a former Soviet Union country, large one. And it's a massive country, and I asked them, so what do you think? How would you reach your country? And they were just very strategic about how they thought about that. They actually drew me a map of their country, and they divided up into 5 regions, and they said, well, we would start in these 5 centres. And in those centres, we would begin to train people and equip them there, and we would then send them out from those centres. So I think being strategic about where you start is really important. So I think it's a great question, but not to then be unopen to what God might be starting up somewhere else. So just because maybe we don't have the capacity or the ability to go somewhere, God might actually be doing something there, and so being open to hearing of places where something is actually happening. But I think Jesus did that. He invested in 12 people and then multiplied that out, and that is a core to our strategy, is investing in, for example, some student leaders in one place who then can multiply out.
Awesome. We have another question from Christine Sarnicki. I hope I pronounced that correctly. What would you say to a student whose family is against them attending or participating in conferences, trips, summer missions with crew?
Well, one of the 10 Commandments is honor your mother and father. And so I think that's really important. I think to take a long-term view of things. Our families, we've been with us for all our lives, and they'll continue to be with us, and God wants us to honour our families.
Definitely.
It doesn't mean that we always have to agree with our families, or that there doesn't come a point when, obviously we become adults and move on from home, that we make choices and do things on our own. But sometimes I think it's okay to not take opportunities and do things if we feel like it would be a better witness for Christ to not do that. But there are other times when it's important to, follow Christ. Jesus says that the challenge for discipleship is great, and sometimes it means going against the will of our parents and family. But in that process, I would say that the principle of how do we honor our parents and what they're expressing or their desire, it may mean disagreeing with them in a healthy way. That might be honoring and saying, you know, I'm of age now, I'm an adult, and I'm going to choose to do this, but I really want to listen and hear what your perspective is and what your thoughts are on that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So last question from Selena Diaz Solorzano. Is it okay to fall in love on a mission trip?
Well, yes and no. No, I guess so. You know, not that I got a lot of experience in this area. I did meet a very good-looking girl on a mission trip once, and so we began to, you know, stay connected for a while. But I think it's possible to stay in love. But here's the thing. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God,
right,
and all those other things will be added to you as well. So I think on a mission trip, God is giving you that priority and that opportunity to focus on mission. It doesn't mean that it's not possible to meet people and grow relationships.
Right.
But that's not the priority and focus of why people have, you know, supported you to go on a mission trip and why you've gone on that trip. And it may be possible to continue that relationship after the trip, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay. I hope that answered your question, Selena.
Yeah.
So our T-shirt winners, for all those who tuned in and asked questions, our T-shirt winners are Kevin, Marshall, Christine, Selena, and Emmanuel, whose question got answered in the Facebook comments. So thank you so much for everybody who did tune in and took part and just either watched or asked questions. And Roger, I just want to thank you one more time for encouraging me and our viewers, those who watched. And do you have any final resources that you want to share?
Actually, yeah, it would be good to, we'll post these in the comments, but there's a few websites that I want to recommend to people to go to if they want to get involved in things. So one is obviously the crew.org website, and if you go on there, there's a section called Train and Grow, and if you go into there, there's great resources on how to share your faith, how to begin a movement, how to lead a small group. Second website is called everycatalyst.com. I mentioned that, you know, our role often can be catalysts to movements starting.
Right.
And the everycatalyst.com website is set up as a training website. There's training that you can download or request training where you could be involved in launching campus movements in different places. And the third one is everystudent.com. Everystudent.com is a website which answers a lot of questions that students have, but many people other than students go to the website. In fact, I believe it was just under 30 million people visited that website last year. And it answers all sorts of questions like the existence of God, what is the reliability of the Bible, what about other religions and relationships. So it covers a lot of different topics. And it's a great place to kind of go to get resources that can kind of also help you in sharing your faith and to direct people to. Yeah, so those would be the three good places I'd recommend people to go to.
Thank you for that. And as Roger mentioned, those will be listed in the comment section, so you can visit what the websites that he mentioned. So once again, Roger, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for tuning in to our Facebook Live.